Dear all, welcome to today's class. In today's session, we are going to discuss personnel planning and recruiting, which is chapter 5 from your book. Now, the chapter on personnel planning and recruitment is a really big chapter. It's going to take 3 whole classes to finish this chapter. So this is the first one of these 3 classes. So today, I am going to discuss these 3 topics. We are going to discuss what workforce planning is, how to forecast demand for candidates, and finally, how to forecast supply of candidates. Now, before moving into the main content of this chapter, I want to start with this very detailed picture here. This whole picture is the summary of 2 chapters in your book. The chapter on personnel planning and recruitment, which is chapter 5, and the chapter on selection, which is chapter 6, which is going to be taken by Maisha Miss. So from this whole picture, in today's class, we are going to focus only on this first green box, which is employment planning and forecasting, which is also known as workforce planning. And in the next 2 classes, we are going to discuss the second green box, which is recruitment. Now, just to mention here, at the very beginning of the next class, I'm going to start with the difference between recruitment and selection. Alright? So many of us in the practical world use these 2 terms as synonyms. We think that these 2 terms are the same. Recruitment and selection mean the same thing. But these 2 terms are very, very different. There is a major difference between these 2 terms. So in the next class, I'll start with the discussion on the difference between these 2 terms. What do I mean by recruitment and what do I mean by selection? So in today's class, we are going to just focus on this first green box. So as promised, let's start our discussion on employment planning, which is also known as workforce planning. Now, this slide contains the formal definition of workforce planning. And I guess it's a pretty straightforward definition. So here goes the formal definition. Workforce planning is the process of deciding these 3 things. So again, workforce planning is the process of deciding, first, how many job positions a firm has to fill or how many people they have to hire. Second, what job positions the firm will have to fill. And finally, how to fill up those job positions. So just to elaborate, in an organization, we have multiple positions. The position of the head of marketing, the position of the head of technology, the IT manager, and maybe also the finance manager. Now, maybe in an organization, some of these positions are empty, they are vacant. So I need to find out how many job positions a firm has to fill right at this moment. So that is part of workforce planning. Next, what are the job positions that I need to fill? Is it the position of a marketing manager or is it the position of a chief technology officer? I need to decide on that. And that is also part of workforce planning. And finally, once I decide which positions to fill up, I have to also find out how am I going to fill up those positions. And that is also part of workforce planning. So in summary, I can say that how many vacant positions do I have in my organization? What are those vacant positions? And how am I going to fill those vacant positions? All of these come under workforce planning. Let me give you an example of workforce planning. Say, Ahona is a very talented HR manager of Robi. Now, after counting, she finds out that this year, Robi needs to hire people for 2 head of the department positions and 5 internship positions. So she has already found out that how many positions she has to fill in total and what are the exact job positions that she has to fill. Now, once she is done with these 2 steps, the next step is to decide how she is going to fill up those positions. So all of these how many, what, and how to fill up, they come under workforce planning. Once Ahona is done with all of these 3, she has successfully completed her workforce planning part. So that is all about workforce planning. Now please note, workforce planning should precede or come before recruitment and selection. So before we can start our recruitment process, our selection process, we have to start with our workforce planning. So this is the very first step. And once workforce planning is done, and I know how many people I have to hire, and what positions to hire for, then I can move on to recruitment and selection. Now let's move on to further details of workforce planning. Now we have seen what is workforce planning, right? Now basically there are two parts under workforce planning. So on the one side, we have forecasting personal needs or forecasting the demand for candidates. And on the other side, we have forecasting the supply of candidates. So it is basically just like your economics course where you were first introduced with demand and supply, I guess. Now, with regards to demand first, I am forecasting the demand of what? Forecasting the demand of the number of employees or candidates that my company is going to need in the future. So how many employees do I need in my organization in the next year or maybe in the next 5 years? That's the demand side. Now, once I find out the demand, I also need to forecast or find out what is the supply of candidates. How many candidates do I have available as my supply whom I can hire for my organization? So basically, it's a simple demand supply calculation. How many employees does a company need? That's demand. And how many candidates or job applicants are available for hiring? That's supply. Let me give you a real life example. In general, right at this moment, the demand for candidates in many organizations is quite low. Why? Because business is not doing well because of coronavirus. So demand for candidates is generally low now. But what about supply? There is a huge supply of candidates or job applicants in the market. So that is supply. So it is not always the case that demand and supply of job applicants will match. There can be a mismatch in supply and demand of candidates or job applicants as well. I'm sure you are very well aware of the concepts of demand and supply from your economics course or even BUS 101 course. Alright, now let's move on to the detail of forecasting personal needs or the demand side. How do we calculate the demand? Now in calculating demand or forecasting personal needs, we can use 4 different steps. Number 1, trend analysis. Number 2, ratio analysis. Number 3, scatter plot. And 4, managerial judgment. Now in this video, we are going to discuss only trend analysis and managerial judgment. So number 1 and 4. We do not have to look at the other options because when you will be doing your Fin 301 course, you will become the master of all of these concepts. You are going to learn very well how to do ratio analysis and how to do scatter plot. So I'm not going to focus on these issues right now. So let's move on to trend analysis. How can we forecast our demand for candidates or personnel needs by using trend analysis? Again, it is very easy and very simple to understand. So let's look at the formal definition first. In trend analysis, we use past employment patterns or trends to predict the future needs. Now don't look at the boring definition. Let me give you the example first and it will be crystal clear to you. Say for example, for the last 5 years, each year Google has hired 100 new people. So every year Google hires 100 people. So this is the trend for Google. Every year they hire 100 people. So based on this trend, I can easily say or forecast that yes, the next year, the number of employees will also increase by 100 again. So Google is going to hire another 100 people in the next year as well. Why? Because that is what the trend is. That is what the past says. So basically, I am following past employment patterns or trends to predict the future here. In the past, I hired 100 people each year. That was the trend. And based on that trend, I can also say that Google is going to hire 100 again this year. It's that easy. No rocket science, right? But there is a big problem to it. There is a huge problem or shortcoming of only relying on trend analysis. What is that problem? Here it is. It assumes that what happened in the past, the exact same thing will happen again. Nothing will change. The situation is going to remain the same in the future as well. That is a really huge flaw. Let me give you an example here, and it will be much clearer to you guys. So suppose you work for a big shot company. Now every year that company hires 1,000 people. Now you are the HR manager of that company. Now based on your trend analysis, your past data analysis, you have decided that yes, I can easily say that this year I will have to hire 1,000 people again. But that is not the case now. Why? Because of coronavirus. People are losing jobs like here and there, and many big organizations are closing their doors. Many of the organizations are not being able to hire just as before. Now, in this situation, if I rely only on trend analysis and say to him that yes, I have done trend analysis, this is my finding, and it says that the best solution for us is to follow the trend and hire 1,000 people, your CEO will go crazy on you, right? Why? Because obviously the organization cannot hire 1,000 people just as before. The business is not doing well. So we cannot rely on trend analysis only, because future personnel demand may be very different from the trend, just as it is right now. So rather than relying on trend analysis only, what we need to do is we have to take the result of our trend analysis and apply our managerial judgment. We have to adjust or change the result of trend analysis by using our managerial judgment as well. So again, past trends, ratios, or relationships will almost always change into the future. And that is why we need to use our managerial judgment to adjust the forecast that we got from trend analysis or from any other method. Now, exactly what do we mean by managerial judgment? It is the subjective judgment or the subjective thinking of the manager. Let me give you an example. How can we apply managerial judgment in adjusting our forecast? Say in the last example, you found out that the trend analysis says you are going to need 1,000 people. Now, before going to your boss, you are applying your subjective thinking or subjective judgment as an HR manager. Now you are thinking to yourself that yes, the situation is really difficult this time, economy is not doing good, businesses are not doing good. So maybe even though the trend analysis says that we are going to need 1,000 people, maybe this time we can only hire 400 people or 100 people for that matter. That is how we apply subjective judgment and change the result of the trend analysis based on our own judgment. Now let me give you some real practical life example of cases where we can use our managerial judgment. So the first example, for applying managerial judgment, we can ask, is the company going to have the same level of production just like the previous years? Just to elaborate, say Naeem works for a luxurious car manufacturing company, right? So your company produces fancy cars. So it had one factory for the last 10 years. Now, once you have done the trend analysis based on last 10 years data, it shows that every year you hire around about 100 people. Now, what if your company is going to set up another factory this year? In that case, you have to again use your managerial judgment. So yes, the trend says that we have to hire 100 people, but my production is going up from this year. So I need to increase my trend analysis figure. So instead of hiring 100 people only, maybe this year I have to hire 150 people or 200 people for that matter. Now, let me give you another example. Say, is your company going to serve new markets or enter into new markets? For this example, let's assume Mantaka is going to launch her own company. So she is going to launch her own company which is similar to Amazon. Say her company's name is Mohajon, fictitious company. Now, she starts her business with online delivery only. Now, say she's doing her business really well and still she is in the same online delivery service. And for this 5 years, she has hired 100 people every year. Now, after 5 years, looking at the success of her own business, she is planning to expand her business. She is planning to move into new markets. So now, she wants to start a new business just like Amazon Prime. So she is thinking of launching Mohajon Prime. So now, gradually, she is planning to move into the digital media business. So when she plans to move into this new market, she is obviously going to need new type of people. Someone who's an expert in media making and digital media content creation, right? So from that here, would she rely only on past data of the last 5 years? No, she wouldn't rely on the trend only because she has to adjust the trend and hire new types of people, hire more people. So again, here she has to use her own managerial judgment again. So these are the two fictitious examples of where we can use our managerial judgment. Alright, we are done in this video. So here we have discussed how to forecast our demand for candidates. In the next video, we are going to discuss how to forecast our supply of candidates. See you very soon.